When Mike Tyson walked into that restaurant, Mia had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She was so accustomed to the exhausting routine of the small roadside diner that she barely registered the jingle of the door's bell when a new customer stepped in. Her focus was on the clock above the counter, just a few minutes shy of 7 in the evening, the time when the dinner rush began to slow down. Most of the people who stopped there were just hungry travelers, truck drivers seeking a jolt of strong coffee to stay awake, families worn out from long trips, or couples looking for a quick meal before hitting the road again. To the customers, that restaurant was just a fleeting stop. To Mia, though, it was her lifeline. At 28 years old, she balanced long hours of work while raising her son, Jordan, who was just 6. Every tip she earned went straight to paying the rent for the modest apartment they lived in, buying school supplies, or on tighter days, ensuring there was enough food in the fridge. There was no room for mistakes. There was no time for dreams. She glided gracefully between the tables, her warm smile serving as a shield against the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The regular customers knew her story, or at least parts of it. Some left a few extra dollars when they could, but Mia never asked for sympathy. She'd learned early on that the world was harsh, and if she wanted to survive, she had to stand strong. That's when she glanced at the door and felt the world pause for a moment. The man who had just walked in wasn't just any traveler. It was Mike Tyson, the Mike Tyson. She held her breath for a second. The greatest heavyweight champion in history. The man who'd terrorized the boxing world with his raw power and relentless speed. He had a presence that seemed to fill the entire space. His body was still imposing, despite the years away from the ring, and the look he cast around the restaurant was both analytical and calm, as if he could take in every detail without lingering on anything for too long. He wore a simple jacket and dark jeans, nothing flashy, but it was impossible not to notice the aura of someone who'd once stood at the top of the world and somehow survived his own fall. Mia felt her heart race. She wasn't the type to be starstruck. There simply wasn't room for that in her life. But this was different. Mike Tyson wasn't just a legend, he was someone her late father had always talked about. When Mia was a kid, her dad used to watch Tyson's fights on TV, cheering with every punch, rooting as if he were ringside. For a brief second, an old memory flashed through Mia's mind. Her and her dad sitting together on the couch as he explained why Mike Tyson was more than just a fighter. That guy doesn't give up, Mia. He's fallen plenty of times, but he always gets back up. She swallowed hard. No time for nostalgia. Mike Tyson was here, in her section, and she had to serve him. Grabbing her notepad and pen, Mia took a deep breath and walked over to the table where he'd seated himself, right in the corner of the restaurant. But something in her gut told her he wasn't there just to eat. As she approached, she noticed details the TV never showed. His hands, weathered by time, his eyes seeming to carry a lifetime of stories, the way he sat, calm, yet always alert. He looked up when she stopped beside the table. His expression was neutral, but his gaze was intense. "Good evening," Mia said, surprised to hear her voice come out steady despite the whirlwind in her mind. "What can I get for you?" Mike picked up the menu, glanced at it for a brief moment, then set it aside. "Just a coffee and a burger, no onions. Simple, straightforward, as if he didn't need anything more." Mia jotted down the order but couldn't help noticing a detail that made her hesitate for a fraction of a second. His hands trembled slightly. It wasn't much, just a subtle tremor. But it was there. Before she could turn to leave, Mike's voice stopped her. "Busy day?" he asked, his tone softer than she'd expected. Most customers didn't bother with small talk, unless they were regulars. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Keeps me sharp." She shrugged, trying to keep it casual. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on her, in a way that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, truly seen. You've got a good rhythm," he said, picking up the napkin and twirling it between his fingers. "It's not easy holding down a place like this." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Mike Tyson, the man who'd built and lost fortunes, the former world champion who'd lived extremes she'd never know. And there he was, noticing her work ethic. "Thanks," was all she managed to say, before stepping away to take the order to the kitchen. But as she walked, her mind spun. Why was Mike Tyson here? He could be at any fancy restaurant in California. Yet here he was, drinking cheap coffee from a chipped mug, waiting for a plain burger. When the order was ready, Mia brought the food to his table and set the plate down carefully in front of him. "Here you go." Mike picked up the coffee mug first, blowing on it lightly before taking a sip. He closed his eyes for a moment, then let out a faint chuckle through his nose. "This takes me back to a long time ago." Mia raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. Instead, she just nodded. "Well, I hope it's a good time." He gave a small smile. "Hard times have their value too." She didn't know why, but a shiver ran down her spine. As she served other tables, she noticed Mike wasn't in a hurry to eat. He lingered, savoring each bite, as if he had all the time in the world. Every now and then their eyes met, and he'd give her a slight nod, and Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from ordinary. The restaurant carried on with its usual routine. Customers came and went, coffee cups were refilled, plates were cleared, and the hum of conversation blended with the soft noise of the jukebox in the background. For Mia, it was just another night, like so many others, or at least it should have been. But it wasn't. Not after Mike Tyson walked through that door. She tried to stay focused, but her attention kept drifting back to the table where the former heavyweight champ ate slowly, unhurried. He was different from the other customers, who wolfed down their food before hitting the road again. Mike seemed to be there for something more. She watched him discreetly while tending to other tables. There was something about the way he held his coffee cup, as if that simple act carried a weight she couldn't grasp. There was something about his presence that made the air feel thicker. And then, it happened. Mike raised his hand slightly, catching her attention. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to his table, keeping her usual professional demeanor. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice steady. He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Perfect. That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." Mia blinked, caught off guard. Was that genuine praise? "I'll let the cook know. He'll like hearing that." A small smile tugged at Mike's lips. But then, he fell silent. He just watched Mia with that intense gaze, as if he were seeing something beyond what she saw in herself. A shiver ran down her spine again. It wasn't a critical look. It wasn't invasive. It was a look of recognition. "You've got a strong energy," he said finally. "Reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago." She furrowed her brow slightly. "Is that a good thing?" Mike let out a low chuckle, as if he liked her response. "It's rare." She felt her face heat up. What did he mean by that? Before she could ask, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out some bills, placing them on the table. Next to the money, there was something else, a folded piece of paper. Mia frowned. "Keep the change," Mike said, his voice carrying a weight she didn't understand. "And read that when you get a moment." Her heart pounded harder. "Thanks." But before she could say anything more, he was already standing up. The bell chimed as Mike stepped out into the cold night, and then he was gone. Mia stood there, frozen, staring at the table for a few seconds. Something much bigger had just happened here, and she knew it. What was written on that note? Why had Mike Tyson left it for her? The questions swirled in her mind, but the restaurant still needed her. She picked up the note and tucked it into her apron pocket, feeling the weight of that small piece of paper like it was lead. She wasn't ready to read it. Not yet. But as she cleared tables and finished her shift, the anticipation grew inside her, until, finally, the time came. The clock struck 11 p.m. when Mia finally sat down in the restaurant's back room. The rush had died down, and the place was nearly empty. The silence of the end of the shift was almost deafening, broken only by the drip of the faucet in the sink. She pulled the note from her pocket. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. And then she began to read. "Mia, I don't know much about you, but in the short time I was here, I saw something rare. I saw someone carrying more weight than they should, but who keeps going anyway. I know what that's like. I recognize it when I see it. I want to tell you something. You're stronger than you think, and I want you to know you're not alone. Here's something to help you breathe a little. Do what you think is best with it. But remember, the real fight in life isn't about how many times we fall, it's about how many times we get back up. You've got a fighter's spirit, and I know you'll win." Mia's heart raced. This couldn't be real. She swallowed hard and with trembling fingers unfolded the piece of paper tucked inside the note. And then she saw it. It was a check. $10,000. Her legs gave out. Mia sank heavily onto the bench, the world spinning around her. $10,000. $10,000. She read and reread it, as if the number might change at any moment. The check was there. Real. Solid. Tears began streaming down her face, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about the meaning behind it. Mike Tyson had seen Mia. He'd truly seen her. Not as the exhausted waitress serving tables night after night, not as the single mum struggling to give her son a decent life, but as a fighter, someone who carried the world on her shoulders but didn't let the weight crush her. The same grit that had kept her standing all these years had been recognized by one of the greatest fighters in history. She gripped the check tightly, her mind racing with questions. Why her? What would she do with this unexpected gift? But as she tried to process it all, one thing became clear: her life would never be the same. Mia sat in the restaurant's back room, clutching the check as if it might vanish at any moment. $10,000. It was surreal. Her mind spun, tears still rolling down her cheeks. That money could change everything. She thought about the stack of bills piling up in her small apartment's kitchen, the nights she'd had to choose between paying rent or buying Jordan a new pair of sneakers. She thought about her son's future, but more than that, she thought about what Mike Tyson had written in the note. The real fight in life isn't about how many times we fall, it's about how many times we get back up. Those words weighed as much as the check. She grabbed her phone and with shaky hands dialed Tasha, her best friend. "You're not going to believe what just happened." 10 minutes later, Tasha burst into the restaurant, her face full of concern. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Mia, still sitting on the bench, just handed her the check. Tasha took it, her eyes widening the moment she saw the amount. "What?" She clapped a hand over her mouth. $10,000? Who gave you this?" "Mike Tyson." Silence filled the room. Tasha blinked several times. "Wait, the Mike Tyson? The boxer? The guy who'd knock people out in one punch? That Mike Tyson?" Mia nodded slowly. Tasha looked at the check again, still trying to process it. "Girl, this isn't a dream? You're sure he didn't just forget this on the table?" Mia pulled the note from her pocket and handed it to her. Tasha read it silently, every word. When she finished, she pressed a hand to her chest and took a deep breath. "My God, this is unbelievable." Mia let out a small laugh, still feeling the tears drying on her face. "Tell me about it." Tasha sat down beside her. "What are you going to do with that money?" That was the big question, wasn't it? The check felt heavy in her hands. She could pay off all the overdue bills. She could fix the leak in the apartment. She could buy new clothes for Jordan. But there was something bigger here. Mike Tyson's gesture wasn't just money. It was a message. He'd seen her. He'd acknowledged her fight, and more than that, he was trusting her. Mia took a deep breath. "I'm going to make it count." Tasha smiled. "I knew you'd say that." The next day, Mia took the check to the bank. The teller glanced at the amount and raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a deposit." Mia just nodded, a small smile on her face. "It's a gift." The teller didn't ask anything more and started processing the deposit. Mia felt a lump in her throat as the money was officially transferred to her account. Suddenly, the impossible became real. When she left the bank, she didn't go home. She drove to the community college in town. For years, she'd passed that building and wondered what it'd be like to study there, wondered if she'd ever get the chance to build something better. Now, she did. She walked in, hands trembling, and approached the admissions desk. A kind-faced woman smiled at her. "How can I help you?" Mia took a deep breath. "I want to enroll in an accounting course." The woman's smile widened. "Great, let's get started." As she filled out the paperwork, Mia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose, hope. This wasn't just about the money. It was about what it represented. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting for something bigger. The months passed. Mia split her days between working at the restaurant and attending classes at the college. It wasn't easy. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered Mike Tyson's note. The real fight in life isn't about how many times we fall, it's about how many times we get back up. She'd gotten back up so many times she'd lost count, and now, for the first time, she felt like she was winning. Jordan noticed the change in his mum. One night, as she studied at the kitchen table, he came over. "Mummy." "Yes, sweetheart." He grinned. "I told my friends you're in college. They thought it was really cool." Mia's heart squeezed. She ruffled his hair affectionately. "And what do you think?" Jordan's grin widened. "I think you're the strongest person I know." Mia's eyes welled up, because in the end it was all for him. But it wasn't just her life Mia wanted to change. Inspired by Mike Tyson's gesture, she started giving back. She set aside part of the money to help people in her community. She bought backpacks for kids who didn't have school supplies. She paid for a week's groceries for a single dad who was barely scraping by. She left generous tips for waiters and waitresses she could tell were struggling, just like she once had. It was her way of carrying on what Mike had started. And maybe, someday, someone would do the same for someone else. Because in the end, kindness begets kindness. And that check wasn't just a gift. It was a spark, a fire that now burned inside her, pushing her to be more, to do more, to never again settle for a life of just getting by. She wanted to live. She wanted to win. And now, she knew she could. One night, many months later, as she waited tables at the restaurant, the door's bell chimed. Mia looked up. For a split second, her heart raced. But it wasn't Mike Tyson. It was just another weary traveler, looking for a meal before hitting the road. She smiled, because now she knew. It didn't matter if Mike Tyson ever came back. He'd always be part of her story. And more importantly, he'd helped her write a new beginning. The greatest fight of her life wasn't against the world. It was against the idea that she couldn't win. Now she knew she could, and she'd never doubt it again.